there. All right, class, so I'm giving you a really small extra credit option, and it's just to get 2 extra credit points that I'll add to your next lecture exam, which will be in a couple of weeks. And to do that, you need to complete the student or course evaluation survey. From what I know, I think you can get to it just in your left-hand screen of Canvas. You should see an option for course evaluation surveys. You might have some to do for other courses as well. And then once you complete it, you don't have to send me, what you wrote or anything, but once you complete it, just take a screenshot where it says completed, and then just send me that screenshot. And then I'll add it to your next lecture exam, which will be, I'm just going to pull up the schedule to take a look at what our schedule looks like. So I've been send me either an email or a Canvas message, and I'll save your email, and then I'll add it to your next lecture exam as 2 extra credit points. In terms of our schedule, we have 2 days to get through digestive system. So we're right here on November 10th. Tomorrow is Veterans Day, so you guys shouldn't have any classes tomorrow, I don't think. If you have lab today, you'll have your lab practical 3 exam. And then next week, you don't have any tests, so you kind of have a week off from tests. Then you have a whole week off for Thanksgiving. So we won't meet at all the week of Thanksgiving. And then your next lecture exam will be the Monday after Thanksgiving. And this lecture exam 5 is what I would add those 2 extra credit points for. So you have, I think, until November 13th, which is what, the end of this week, Saturday, to do that course evaluation survey. So please do that and then send me a picture to get your 2 extra credit points. Any other questions? I think some of you need to take, who in my lab section, need to take the lab practical 3 still. One of you is going to take it today. So just remind me about that. And a couple of you are going to come see me in my office hours tomorrow. So like usual, I'll just need to be reminded about that. Okay, so let's jump into your digestive system. As you can see here, we don't have much to get through before the end of the semester. The digestive system will divide into 2 parts because there's a lot to get through. So we'll get through about half of it today and then the other half on Monday. So it's always more fun now that we're getting into kind of your body systems, I think. So your digestive system and the idea of digestion, it's the breakdown of large organic molecules into smaller ones that can be absorbed. So that's the idea of digestion. So when you eat an apple or scrambled eggs for breakfast, your body will try to digest it. So it'll take the larger organic molecules and break them down into much smaller molecules that can get through the intestinal wall so they can be absorbed. And once those nutrients are absorbed, they usually go to the liver for processing or other parts of the body for storage. Your digestive system then performs that task of digestion where food is taken in. It's enzymatically broke down into smaller and smaller particles for absorption. Thanks for that message, George. That sounds good. Okay, thanks for the reminder. Here are your digestive system functions. It helps to ingest solids and liquids. It digests organic molecules, so it breaks larger organic molecules down into smaller ones. And then it absorbs those smaller molecules, usually when they pass directly through the intestinal wall and then into the bloodstream, as well as eliminating waste. So anything that your body can't absorb will be eliminated. If you think about digestion and the food you eat, try to keep that separate from, feces that you produce versus urine that you produce. Urinary system is all the filtering of blood that goes through your kidneys, and we'll go through urinary system in the next body system. So here are the parts of the digestive system. It's basically one long tube. So it starts in the oral cavity. The pharynx is the throat. Remember, the pharynx or throat will share with your respiratory system. So air and food go down your pharynx. But then at the part of the epiglottis will cover the top of the larynx, which is the top of your windpipe or trachea, so that food will actually go down your esophagus. For food to travel down the esophagus, it takes about 6 to 8 seconds. Then it goes into your stomach, where digestive juices are kind of pumped in, then through your small intestine. Small intestine is named because it has a much smaller diameter than the large intestine. The small intestine is where the bulk of your absorption of nutrients occurs. And then the large intestine has a much larger diameter, Even though it's smaller in length, the large intestine is also known as the colon. So if you hear of someone with colon cancer, that's most likely cancer of the large intestine. So that one long continuous tube starting from the oral cavity, ending in the rectum and the anus, that's the pathway that food goes, and any food that cannot be absorbed gets eliminated as feces. You have accessory organs, the liver, gallbladder, pancreas, that will help with digestion and absorption of nutrients that will go through too. So the digestive system consists of that digestive tract, which is the one long continuous tube, plus specific associated organs that usually pump digestive enzymes into the tract to help with absorption. It's also referred to as the GI tract, gastrointestinal tract or tube, and it's one long tube from the mouth to the anus. This is the digestive tract. So every kind of part that's listed in that one long continuous tube traveling from the oral cavity to the esophagus, stomach, small intestines, large intestine, rectum, and anus. Pablo. Yes, that's okay. I know I realized a couple of you were asking me if you could take the exam tomorrow, even though, yeah, that's okay, Pablo. Just remind me after this and we'll talk about that. Associated organs are also called accessory organs. So they're not directly within that continuous tube, but they have ducts that lead into the tract for very important reasons. And these associated or accessory organs are the salivary glands that secrete saliva, which has enzymes in it to start the breakdown process in the mouth, the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. And we'll go over what those each associated organs do as well. So within the layers, or within the digestive tract tube, regardless of where we are, whether we're at the esophagus, the stomach, or the intestines, the layers of the walls of those organs are all the same. And we call the layers of the tract wall tunics. And they might differ a little in how large or small the tunics are, but they all basically have these three main layers that make up the walls of this tube. The mucosa is the innermost layer, so the one that will touch all the foodstuffs that's traveling down. It will secrete mucus. The submucosa will be above the mucosa layer. It will contain blood vessels, nerves, and cephalic glands. The muscularis will be above that or below that, depending on how you're working your way out. And the muscularis layer is what will contain the different layers of muscles to help kind of squeeze or propel the foodstuffs down the tract. And then the serosa or adventitia layer is the outermost layer. Peritoneum is present, and that's called serosa. And if no peritoneum is present, then that's called adventitia. The peritoneum is the layer of the wall inside the cavity. And we'll kind of go through what that means. So these are just the four layers of the digestive tract wall. And you can see them here. So if we work our way, the innermost layer is the mucosa layer. So it will be kind of the mucous membrane layer. The submucosa layer will be external to that. The muscularis layer, you see these kind of circular and longitudinal muscle layers. And again, when they contract, they will help to kind of propel or squeeze the foodstuffs down, kind of like squeezing a yogurt tube. And then the serosa is the serous membrane, the visceral peritoneum. So this is just kind of where the connective tissue, the serosa is just kind of the layer of connective tissue that will kind of anchor the digestive tract organ or tube to the surrounding wall. So that's what serosa is. We'll see some mesenteries, which mesenteries are kind of a continuation of the serosa, where blood vessels and nerves travel through, and mesenteries just help to anchor, especially in the small and large intestine. Your intestines aren't just kind of hanging out and flying all over the place. The mesentery is kind of a flap or an apron of connective tissue that kind of holds all of your intestines in place. So what is the peritoneum? It's a layer of smooth epithelial tissue. And the peritoneum is kind of an all-inclusive layer that describes these different kind of stabilizing features, especially located in your intestine region, where you have a lot of intestines around and you need kind of everything to be held together. Mesenteries are the connective tissue of the organs in the abdominal cavity. So again, mainly the stomach and the intestines. The lesser omentum is the mesentery connecting the lesser curvature of the stomach to the liver and diaphragm. So basically, this is just a piece of connective tissue that's stabilizing or connecting the stomach to the liver and the diaphragm. So it just kind of holds the stomach in place by connecting it to the liver and the diaphragm above it. And the greater omentum is the mesentery connecting the greater curvature of the stomach, so the bottom part of the stomach, to the transverse colon, which is the large intestine that goes across your abdominal cavity in the posterior body wall. So again, peritoneum is this kind of all-inclusive word for the different types of connective tissue that connect or stabilize these abdominal structures. So here's a look. It's kind of a confusing view. It's a sagittal view showing the peritoneum and the mesenteries. It shows, and again, it's kind of confusing to kind of pick out what is being shown here. But if you look kind of in purple, the purple lines are showing the lesser omentum, the greater omentum, and the mesentery proper. You can see how these purple lines of connective tissue are connecting these organs together. So the lesser omentum is connecting your stomach to your liver. The greater omentum kind of connects your transverse colon to your stomach. And then the lesser, or the mesentery proper, then is connecting kind of your small intestines together. And you can see how it's connecting them kind of to the parietal peritoneum, which again is the layer of tissue that kind of is layering the inside abdominal cavity. So if you think of your abdominal cavity, you have a layer of tissue that kind of surrounds the cavity itself. And then you have these peritoneum and mesenteries that are kind of anchoring the organs together so that these organs aren't just, again, flopping all over the place in your abdominal cavity. They're all kind of held to where they should be. So those are the peritoneum and the mesenteries. So we'll start kind of at the top and we'll work our way down. The oral cavity is the first part of the digestive system. It contains stratified squamous epithelium. And again, that means many layers of flat-shaped cells. And remember, that type of epithelium can be easily sloughed off and regenerated, which is good because your oral cavity sees a lot of wear and tear of things sliding past it, kind of sloughing off those cells, all the food and drink that you take in. So that's why the stratified squamous epithelium is helpful for all the abrasion of food that you take in. Salivary glands produce saliva, which contains an enzyme that helps to break down carbohydrates into glucose. This saliva also keeps your mouth clean and it dissolves and moistens foods, especially carbohydrates. So that saliva is important. The saliva is actually activated even if you feel hungry. Your mouth might water when you smell something yummy. So that's just your brain getting your mouth ready to break down food that it's already smelling or you're hungry for. These are the two enzymes in the saliva, amylase and lysozyme. Amylase is the enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates. So specifically, any type of carbohydrate that you might eat, amylase will break it down. Lysozyme is an enzyme that is active against any bacteria. So it's very important to have this enzyme in your saliva because we're not always taking in things that are necessarily good. So we might be taking in some bacteria. So we have an enzyme right away to try to fight off any bacteria that enters the oral cavity. And then the tongue inside the oral cavity will house your taste buds as well as mucus. So here we have the oral cavity. The teeth are very important for chomping and chewing the food. Here's the uvula, which is kind of the boxing ball hanging down. This soft palate, again, when you swallow food, will raise up and close off the opening to your nasal cavity so that food doesn't come out your nose. Here's your tongue. The frenulum is what connects the tongue down to the bottom. You see openings to submandibular ducts, which will release saliva from the submandibular gland. The gingiva is just another word for gums that will cover the mandibular alveolar process, so the part of your mandible where your teeth are attached, and then you see labelings for your different types of teeth as well. So the teeth we'll talk about a little bit. In the normal adult, you have 32 teeth from the incisors, canines, which are the pointed ones, premolars, molars, and wisdom. Many of us have our wisdom teeth removed. Babies have 20 primary teeth that will fall out from anywhere from 4 to 10 years old. Each tooth has a crown, a cusp, a neck, and a root. We'll go over the anatomy of teeth a little bit. The center of the tooth is called the pulp cavity, which is where your blood vessels and nerves will travel through. The enamel is a hard covering that protects against abrasions. And one kind of fun fact about enamel, it's the hardest, strongest substance in the body. And it's a good place to have it on your teeth, which again are taking in a lot, 3-6 times a day as we eat. If you have a cavity, which many of us do, unfortunately, this is the breakdown of enamel by acids from bacteria. So that's what a cavity is. It can actually kind of break through the enamel, form a hole in your teeth. So that's why, the dentist will put actually kind of cement or cement mixture to kind of fill in the cavity, because it's trying to make up for enamel, which is extremely hard and strong. So they make like a cement mixture to fill in that cavity. So here are the teeth itself and how we get 32. Again, we have first premolars, second premolars, molars, 2 molars, and then the third molar is your wisdom tooth. If you don't have space for your wisdom tooth, it's much easier to get them removed when you're younger versus older. And then here are the baby teeth. Here's a look at the anatomy of the molar tooth in place in the alveolar bone itself. So what you're looking down here is the bone that the tooth is kind of cemented in. Here is the cusps of the tooth are kind of the humps of that molar. The enamel then, this is again what makes up the strongest substance in the entire body is enamel. And the part of the tooth that you can see and brush and is nice pearly white, maybe if you don't drink coffee or wine, that is the crown of the tooth. So the crown is the part that kind of is above the surface. The neck will be the part between the crown, and then the root is the part below the surface. Within the root, you have the pulp cavity, which is where you see the nerves and blood vessels, also known as the root or the root canal. So the canal within the root is also known as the pulp cavity. You here have cementum, which is another part that kind of makes up, that goes into the enamel. You have different ligaments that hold the tooth into place, and then the alveolar bone itself. So the palate then is the roof of the mouth. So the roof of the oral cavity, the anterior part is the hard part, and you can feel that. You can feel that it's hard. The soft palate is then the posterior part that you can't really feel all the way back there. But again, the soft palate is what will raise when you swallow, so that food does not go into your nasal cavity. You have 3 main types of salivary glands: the submandibular, sublingual, and parotid, and they all produce saliva that contains those enzymes to break down food. Mumps is inflammation of the parotid gland, for example. And let's take a look at where these salivary glands are located. So the parotid gland is the largest salivary gland, and it's located on top of your masseter muscle, which is the big chewy muscle kind of on your jaw. You can see the parotid duct leading into the oral cavity. You also see here the sublingual and submandibular gland. The sublingual gland is located right below your tongue. Sublingual means below the tongue. And the submandibular gland is located right below kind of the jaw of the mandible, or the body part of the mandible. And you can see here where ducts will enter the mouth, the ducts of the sublingual and the ducts of the submandibular. And dentists know where those ducts enter your mouth, and that's why, they have the little suction tube. He's going right at the opening of these ducts. So if you're salivating a lot during dental work, he's trying to put that suction cup right at the openings of where those ducts are to make his area clean so he can work and fix your teeth. So the pharynx is just another word for your throat. It will connect your mouth, your oral cavity, to the esophagus. And these are the 3 parts of the pharynx, which we went over a little bit in respiratory system. The nasopharynx is right behind the nasal cavity. Oropharynx is behind the oral cavity, and then the laryngopharynx is right behind your larynx or your voice box. So then the esophagus, and we'll get through again half the PowerPoint. I'm trying to look at the time, maybe 15 more minutes we'll get through. The esophagus, again, is the tube that connects your pharynx or your throat to your stomach. Remember, your esophagus travels behind your trachea. This will transport your food to the stomach, and it joins the stomach at an opening called the cardiac opening. And heartburn occurs when gastric juices regurgitate into the esophagus, usually because there's a sphincter, which is a muscle that opens and closes. and it doesn't close all the way. So heartburn can occur when some of the juices in your stomach regurgitate back into the esophagus. Heart can be caused by a variety of different things. Some people think it's genetic, even because if the sphincter doesn't close all the way. It might be something you can't control, but other things that can cause it are caffeine, smoking, eating, or drinking in excess. So the idea of swallowing, so food moving from the mouth down to your stomach, this takes about 6 to 8 seconds, which is interesting to think about, because when you're extremely hungry and you eat a bite of food, you already feel satisfaction from eating and you already feel better, even though the food hasn't even gotten to your stomach yet. So the voluntary phase is the idea of you kind of pushing the mass of food, which we call a bolus, formed in the mouth, and we push it into the oropharynx, which is the throat behind the oral cavity. So we do that with the help of our tongue. And then the pharyngeal phase is the swallowing reflex, initiated when that bolus stimulates receptors in the oropharynx. And then the esophageal phase is when it moves from the pharynx to your stomach. And peristalsis are actually the wave-like contractions as food moves through your digestive tract. And this occurs in your esophagus, but peristalsis also occurs in other parts of your digestive tract. And again, it's the wave-like movements of movement that food through the digestive tract. Why does being overweight cause heartburn? Good question, Ryan. I'm not sure the exact physiology of that. It said eating in excess can cause heartburn. So, if you're overweight, maybe you are eating in excess. So you're just putting a lot of pressure on, your esophagus and stomach in general. So anytime your esophagus opens into your stomach, that sphincter has to open and close. So, if you're taking in a lot of food, that's just a lot of pressure on that sphincter. So the sphincter might kind of become weaker and it might not eventually be able to close all the way. Specifically, I'm not sure, they also, pregnancy, someone who is pregnant can also cause heartburn. So it also might be due to the increase in pressure within the abdominal cavity of a growing baby, or along with that being overweight, the growing pressure in the abdominal cavity can also push food back up through that sphincter. More work for your system. Probably a good way to say it too, George. Yeah, being overweight, pregnant is just more work for the system. Here are the events during the 3 phases of swallowing. So the voluntary phase is pushing the bolus back into the throat. The pharyngeal phase is when the soft palate elevates, moves down the pharynx. And then we have kind of successive contractions and constrictors in the throat that move it down the throat into the esophagus. And then during the actual esophageal phase, when it travels down your esophagus, it's moved by what we call these peristaltic contractions. And I knew this picture was coming up. So this kind of shows what peristalsis is. So we have kind of a wave of smooth muscle contractions, which are pushing the bolus along. We have contraction, relaxation as it kind of just pushes. And peristalsis is very similar to kind of squeezing the Go-Gurt and the yogurt out, because you contract it down here, the yogurt moves up, you relax, you contract it more. That's pretty much what peristalsis is. So the stomach then is located in the abdomen below your diaphragm. This is our storage tank for food. It can hold up to 2 liters of food, which is a lot. Some people in weight loss surgery get their stomach shrunk so that it can't hold as much food. So you won't have the sensation of being hungry all the time. Your stomach will feel full. Not necessarily a good idea for weight loss surgery because it's just hard, other better ways for weight loss than shrinking your stomach. The stomach will produce mucus, hydrochloric acid, which is one of the strongest acids that we know, and protein digesting enzymes. It will contain that thick mucus layer produced by the mucus that will help to lubricate and protect epithelial cells on the stomach wall from the extremely acidic pH. So you have very strong acid in your stomach, which helps to break down food. Also enzymes, which help to break down enzymes that help to break down proteins. So in your stomach, food is being broken down, but it's not really being absorbed into your bloodstream yet. We have an extremely acidic environment to try to break apart the foodstuffs we're eating. Because of this extremely acidic environment, this acidic environment can cause holes in your stomach wall, and that's called an ulcer. But your stomach will produce mucus, which will kind of be this protective, thick mucus layer of the stomach wall itself to just protect holes from being formed in the stomach wall. You have 3 muscular layers of the stomach. Again, these muscular layers are important for producing a churning action, so kind of mixing the food, helping it break down. Rugae are large folds inside the stomach that allow it to stretch and recoil. And chyme is what we call, so it's been a bolus, so it's been, let's say, an apple, it turns into a bolus. Once it gets into the stomach, we change the name to chyme, which is kind of the paste-like substance that forms when the food begins to be broken down. Chyme. A couple openings. The pyloric opening is the opening between the stomach and the small intestine. So this will be the opening on the bottom side of your stomach before that chyme enters your small intestine, which is the next place it goes. The pyloric sphincter is a thick ring of smooth muscle around the pyloric opening that'll open and close when the chyme will move into your small intestine. And hunger pangs are when the stomach is stimulated to contract by low blood glucose levels, and that's usually 12 to 24 hours after a meal. If any of you have done fasting, you feel these hunger pains, and that's your stomach actually contracting, triggered by low blood glucose levels. So here's some anatomy and histology of the stomach. You can see kind of the different walls of muscles that make up the stomach. We label parts of the stomach. So here we have the gastroesophageal opening, in which there will be a kind of a lower esophageal sphincter at that part. And again, a sphincter is any part of smooth muscle that will surround an opening that'll close it off or open. So that esophageal sphincter is what in heartburn won't close all the way because these very acidic juices will come back into your esophagus. And the acidic juices, you know, pH 3, that's why heartburn hurts, because you're having extremely strong acids traveling up your esophagus. So that's why, what do you take? You take antacid, you take Tums, you're basically taking a base to try to counteract that strong acidity. The fundus is the dome part shaped of the stomach at the top. The body is the majority. We have rugae, which are these teeny tiny folds on the inside. The lesser curvature and the greater curvature describe the different curves of the stomach. And here we have the pyloric sphincter, which is the smooth muscle that will open and close, leading into the first part of the small intestine, which we call the duodenum. So food will travel from the small intestine or the chyme into the duodenum. Here's a look at the histology of the stomach wall itself. It has these kind of deep gastric pits, which are lined with different types of cells. Mucous neck cells create the mucus, which again, the mucus is trying to protect your stomach from having an ulcer. So sometimes if you're prone to having a lot of ulcers, ulcers can be due to stress, but they can also be due to some sort of, it can be an autoimmune disease, something else that is attacking these mucus cells so that your stomach isn't creating the mucus that it needs. So if your cells aren't creating mucus, you'll create ulcers more easily as well. Parietal and sheath cells and endocrine cells all produce specific substances within the stomach itself. So regulation of stomach secretion, parasympathetic stimulation. Remember, in our nervous system, the parasympathetic division was your rest and digest division. So this will be the system that kicks into gear when we want to digest things. So the parasympathetic will stimulate gastrin and histamine, which will increase stomach secretions. The cephalic phase is the first phase of stomach secretion. And again, gastrin or histamine are different types of hormones that will increase stomach secretions. And stomach secretions will increase, first of all, when you see food, if you smell it, if you taste it, or even if you think about it, your stomach will get ready to start secreting some of these juices to help with getting your stomach ready to break food down. The gastric phase is the second phase of stomach secretion, and this is when you actually have things in your stomach, partially digested proteins. Your stomach will distend or stretch. This stretching of your stomach promotes more secretion as well. And then the third phase is when we have acidic chyme. So the presence of chyme and the acidity of chyme will stimulate more neuronal reflexes from the brain to secrete more hormones. This eventually, when we get to this phase, we'll have our negative feedback mechanism. So if we're getting finally to the third phase, we'll eventually inhibit gastric secretions because we've kind of reached our point of having enough. So here we have the cephalic phase. Again, the sight, the smell, the thought of food will cause your hypothalamus to start sending some sort of stimulation down to your stomach to secrete histamine and gastrin, to tell your blood to secrete more stomach secretions in your stomach, just to get your stomach ready for the food that it might be about to be ingested. Distension, stretching of the stomach will increase even more stomach secretions. And then finally, in the third phase, we'll have local reflexes. That'll actually decrease the gastric secretion. So what this means, eventually, if we've actually changed our food into chyme at this point, and it's about to travel into your small intestine, then your stomach secretions will kind of level off and decrease. So movement in the stomach, mixing waves are weak contraction, which thoroughly mix the food to form chyme. We have peristaltic waves, which are a stronger contraction, and they will force chyme toward and through the pyloric sphincter. You'll have hormonal and neural mechanisms that stimulate stomach secretions. And your stomach will empty about 4 afters after a regular meal and 6 to 8 hours after a high fatty meal. So, after you eat a meal, it'll take about 4 hours to get through your stomach, probably another 4 to 8 hours, more like 8 hours to get through your intestines. But that's how long it takes for your stomach to empty, about 4 to 8 hours, depending on what you're eating. So this is showing the mixing waves, the peristaltic waves. Again, the role of your stomach is to mix the food, turn it into chyme, break it down, but not absorb it into your digestive tract, not absorb it into your bloodstream yet. So that's why your stomach is very acidic. It has a lot of secretions coming into it just to help break down your food and turn it into chyme. So with that, we're almost halfway through. We got about 35 minutes in. I might pause there and we'll finish the second half of this on Monday. So I'll go ahead and end the recording. And then if you